My name's Daniel Hayes, and I'll never forget the look on their faces when they thought they'd finally broken me. It was a Thursday morning, the kind of cold, gray day where the air itself feels judgmental. HR's rep met me at my desk, tight smile, stretched thin eyes, darting like she'd rather be anywhere else. She led me into one of those sterile conference rooms where hope goes to die, white walls, buzzing, fluorescent lights, a table that could double as a morgue slab. Across from me sat the new chief operations officer, posture, smug legs crossed like he'd already claimed victory. 19 years I had given to this place. 19 years of missed birthdays, weekends spent in server rooms and cleaning up disasters this guy couldn't even pronounce. And here it was. No handshake, no thank you for your service, just a crisp folder slid across the table and a monotone. We'll need your badge, your laptop, and the company mug. The mug. A chipped ceramic thing with our old logo from back when our office was a rented basement with a space heater that coughed more than it warmed. They said it like it was some priceless artifact, like taking it from me would somehow erase my history here. I stared at it for a long beat, my reflection warped on the glossy black table before placing it down slowly, deliberately. The COO's smirk deepened. He thought this was a trophy, a symbol of his authority. He thought he'd stripped me of everything. I bit back a laugh, because while they thought they were taking my last piece of this company, I still held the one thing they couldn't buy, steal, or bluff their way into. Something I'd kept quietly for nearly 2 decades, so woven into the company's bloodstream, they'd forgotten it was ever mine to begin with. And as I sat there pretending to be the picture of quiet defeat, I was already counting the hours until they learned the truth. You see, endings have a way of looking permanent until you realize they're just the opening move of a much bigger game. I walked out of that conference room like a man carrying nothing but my coat, at least that's what they saw. What I was really carrying was control. Not the kind you flaunt in meetings or plaster across quarterly reports. I'm talking about the quiet, invisible kind. The kind that looks like nothing until the moment it matters, and then suddenly it's everything. In my pocket, that control didn't weigh an ounce, but in the right moment, it could weigh down the entire company. I kept my shoulders low, my steps unhurried, playing the part of the loyal employee turned casualty of strategic restructuring. If anyone looked closely, they might have caught the faint curl of a smile tugging at my lips. What they didn't know and wouldn't realize until it was far too late was that their entire client infrastructure, the portal that 50,000 businesses across the country logged into every day, still lived on a domain, registered in my name. 19 years ago, when we were just a handful of caffeine-fueled dreamers in a basement, there was no budget for extras like domain fees or SSL certificates. Our founder had begged me to get the client portal live by Monday morning. It was Friday night. We had no legal department, no procurement process, just me, a personal credit card, and the knowledge that if I didn't act, the company would die before it ever took its first breath. So I bought it, $59.99, every year after the renewal hit my card. At first, I'd forward the receipt to the founder, he'd send a thumbs-up emoji back. Then over time, even that stopped. No one asked about ownership. No one transferred it. The domain became like oxygen, essential but invisible. And now the COO, with his fresh MBA and store-bought confidence, thought he'd won because he got my mug. That mug could sit in his office like a trophy for all I cared. He could parade it around to impress whoever still believed his leadership mattered. But while he admired his prize, the actual heart of the company, the domain that was the front door to every login, every order, every invoice, wasn't his. It wasn't theirs. It was mine. I kept my face neutral as I passed the desks of people I'd trained, people I'd covered for when their kids were sick or their cars wouldn't start. A few glanced up, brows knit with sympathy. Others pretended to be deeply interested in whatever was on their screens. I didn't stop. I didn't say goodbye. Not yet. Words in that moment wouldn't carry the weight I needed them to. Because what I was planning wasn't about making a scene. It was about making an impact. And you don't waste impact on hallway gossip. Before I go on, tell me something. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where this story is landing because I promise what's coming next is going to make you think twice about what you actually own. And if you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this ride because we're just getting started. The security guard who escorted me to the door looked more embarrassed than I felt. Poor guy was just doing his job. Outside, the January wind knifed through my coat, but it felt clean, bracing, the kind of cold that wakes you up after you've been half asleep for too long. I slipped my hands into my pockets and felt the edge of a worn business card, my lawyer's card. I'd kept it for wills, taxes, the occasional boring adult obligation. But now it had a new purpose. The COO's smirk replayed in my mind like a bad commercial, only it didn't make me angry anymore. It made me calm, focused. Because while he thought the company could just rebuild my baby in a week, I knew the truth. Without that domain, they weren't rebuilding anything. They were tearing down their own walls without realizing it. And in less than 24 hours, they were going to see what a real loss looked like. Not a mug, not a badge, but the one thing they couldn't replace. The game had started the second I walked out that door. They just hadn't realized yet that I was the one holding the clock. To understand why this domain was my ace in the hole, you have to go back to the beginning, before the corner office politics, before the strategic vision memos, before the glossy annual reports. Back to when the company was nothing but a name we scribbled on a whiteboard in a basement that smelled like damp concrete and burnt coffee. We didn't have money back then. I'm not talking about tight budget broke, I mean broke. Lunch was peanut butter sandwiches someone brought from home. Our servers were a mismatched pile of secondhand desktops shoved against the wall, humming like overworked air conditioners. There was no HR department, no legal team, no procurement. Just a few of us stubborn enough to believe we could build something from scratch. One Friday night, the founder, Jonas, stormed in from a phone call with our first big prospect. He said they'd sign if we could get a client portal up by Monday morning. It was already 8 p.m. "We can't hire an agency, we can't delay. Just figure it out," he said, pacing like the floor was on fire. We needed a domain immediately. Problem was, the company didn't even have a business credit card yet. Jonas looked at me like I was the guy who could bend time and money to his will. I didn't argue. I pulled out my personal Visa, went to GoDaddy, and typed in the name we wanted. $59.99 later, it was ours, mine technically, but I didn't think about it like that then. Over the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I Frankensteined together a portal using open-source tools, some duct-taped scripts, and way too much caffeine. By Monday morning, we had a login page, a working database, and just enough security to keep the thing from getting shredded by bots. That portal became the company's front door. Every password reset, every order, every invoice ran through it. And every year, like clockwork, I got the renewal email for the domain. I'd pay it sometimes, sending Jonas the receipt, sometimes not. He'd send back a thumbs-up emoji if I did. After a while, no one asked about it. They treated the domain like air, always there, always free. I guess they assumed someone somewhere in the company was taking care of it. But there was no someone. There was just me. The thing about details is, they're invisible until they're not. And when that detail is the single piece of digital property your entire business runs on, losing sight of it isn't just sloppy, it's lethal. For years, I never considered using it as leverage. We were a family back then, or at least it felt that way. You don't weaponize trust against people you believe in, but that family feeling had evaporated long before the new COO marched in with his clipboard and his smirk. Now the ownership of that domain wasn't just a detail, it was a loaded gun on the table. And I was the only one holding the trigger. It wasn't about revenge for me. Revenge burns too hot too fast. This was about control, about showing them what it meant to erase the people who built the foundation you're standing on. And I was going to do it in a way they couldn't spin, couldn't bury in PR fluff, couldn't fix with a one-week rebuild. That's the thing most executives never understand. You can replace a title, but you can't replace the person who knows which screws keep the whole machine from flying apart. If you've ever built something from nothing, tell me, have you ever been in a moment where one small decision changed everything? Share it in the comments. I want to see how many of you know the feeling I'm talking about, because that's exactly where this story turns. Looking back, it's almost poetic. The same act that saved the company in its infancy, me putting that domain on my personal card, was now the one thing that could strangle it in its prime. They had no idea. But they were about to find out. And when they did, it wouldn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It would arrive in silence, a clean digital break, like flipping a switch and watching the lights go out. I'd protected that domain for 19 years. Now, for the first time, I was thinking about what would happen if I didn't. Most people think control is about being in the room where decisions are made. They imagine board meetings, closed-door negotiations, men and women in suits trading favors like poker chips. But real control. It's quieter. invisible. It's knowing that without a single word, you can change the course of an entire company before lunch. That's what the domain was, my invisible lever. And here's why it mattered so much. Every single piece of the company's digital life ran through it. The login page that every client bookmarked, the password reset tool that generated automated emails, the payment gateway that processed millions of dollars in transactions every month, the internal API calls between departments. Even the company's customer service scripts started with go to ourportal.com. You pull that out from under them, and it's not just a technical hiccup, it's cardiac arrest. You can't just point the site somewhere else like flipping a light switch. It means rebuilding authentication systems, migrating terabytes of client data, reissuing credentials, and praying you don't lose customer trust in the process. That's months of work minimum. And here's the kicker. It's not just the rebuild that hurts. It's the trust gap. Even if you get the tech back online, how do you convince 50,000 businesses, banks, insurance firms, logistics companies that they can trust you with their data after a meltdown like that? That's why the COO's smug line about rebuilding my baby in a week was more than arrogance, it was ignorance. He didn't even know enough to be afraid. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd been the one quietly keeping these fragile connections alive, patching holes no one else saw, renewing that domain. Like I was watering a plant everyone else forgot existed. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. Until the moment they didn't have it anymore. This was the part of the plan I savored the most, not the chaos itself, but the precision of it. I wasn't going to storm into a server room and pull plugs. I wasn't going to hack into their systems or break any laws. I didn't have to. All I had to do was nothing, just let the license lapse. The moment it did, the lock would click shut, and they'd be standing outside their own front door rattling the handle. I knew what that would look like from the inside. At first, a few customer service reps would think it was just maintenance. They'd refresh, try a different browser, maybe send a quick note to IT. It would check the servers fine, check the firewalls fine. The panic would build in layers like a slow-moving wave team leads department heads, executives. And then someone, probably a junior tech with a bad feeling, would check the voice record, and there it would be in black and white, my name, my address, my ownership. Not the company's, mine. That's the moment the wave turns into a rip current pulling everything under. I thought about that moment a lot in the hours after my exit interview. Not with glee is for amateurs. This was colder, cleaner. The way a surgeon thinks before making the first incision. You ever had someone underestimate you so badly you almost feel sorry for them? Almost. Let me know in the comments, because that's where I was standing, in that narrow space between pity and inevitability. The beauty of this plan was that it was entirely theirs to lose. They'd built their empire on a foundation they didn't own, and they never bothered to check. All I had to do was let the clock run out. And as I sat at my kitchen table that night, the renewal date circled in my mind like a shark in shallow water, I realized something. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about showing them that ownership isn't about titles or paychecks or who signs the dismissal papers. Ownership is about control. And until they understood that they were going to keep making the same mistakes. The difference now. This time, they'd learned the lesson on my terms. I didn't touch the domain that night. I could have one log and a few clicks, and their world would have gone dark before midnight. But I wasn't here for fireworks. I was here for the slow burn, the kind that crawls under the skin and stays there. See, anger is messy. It makes you rush, makes you sloppy. I wasn't going to let them have the satisfaction of calling this a tantrum from a disgruntled ex-employee. No, this was going to be deliberate, measured, almost surgical. The decision to wait wasn't hesitation. It was strategy. You don't fire a shot the second you see your target, you wait for them to step right into the perfect line. And right now, the company was about to have a big client demo on Monday morning. I knew because I'd built half the damn presentation framework for it before they decided I was disposable. If the portal went dark, then in front of potential million-dollar accounts, the humiliation wouldn't just sting, it would leave scars. So I spent the weekend watching from the sidelines. My phone buzzed with messages from old colleagues, some sincere, some fishing for gossip. I gave them nothing. The less anyone suspected, the cleaner the break would be. On Saturday, I brewed a strong pot of coffee and sat at my desk staring at the domain dashboard. The little green active badge felt like a loaded gun safety catch. One flip and that badge would turn red. I hovered over the renewal toggle, then moved my mouse away. Not yet. By the way, if you're listening to this and thinking I've been in a similar spot, tell me, what did you do? Did you pull the trigger or did you wait? I want to hear your stories in the comments because patience is the hardest part of control. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button now. You're not going to want to miss how this plays out. By Sunday night, the anticipation had settled into something almost peaceful. Like I was watching a storm build over the ocean, knowing I was the one who could choose exactly when and where the lightning would hit. I thought about the COO's face when I handed over that mug, how sure he was that the victory was his. He didn't know the first thing about me. If he had, he would have recognized the look in my eyes, not defeat, but calculation. Monday morning came cold and bright. I was up before sunrise coffee steaming beside my laptop. I logged into the registrar, my cursor hovering over the disable option. At 7:58 a.m., I clicked. The page refreshed, the green badge vanished. And just like that, the lock turned. Inside their offices, someone would be hitting refresh, wondering why the login page wasn't loading. 2 minutes later, it wouldn't just be someone, it would be everyone. The sales team prepping for their big pitch, the account managers logging in for morning check-ins, the support reps answering tickets from early riser clients. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip. This wasn't revenge. This was a lesson. Ownership isn't about what you hold in your hands, it's about what you can take away. And today, they were going to learn just how much they'd lost long before they told me to clear out my desk. From the outside, I'm sure it looked like I'd done nothing at all. But that's the thing about real power, it doesn't announce itself. It just changes the air in the room. And everyone else has to figure out why they suddenly can't breathe. The first alerts started trickling in before 8:05 a.m. I knew the rhythm by heart, the soft chime of an incoming ticket in their support queue, the Slack ping that makes everyone glance up from their screens. A customer service rep somewhere on the third floor probably told a caller, "Just give us a moment, the site might be under maintenance." By 8:10, that trickle had turned into a flood. The login page wasn't loading for anyone anywhere. Instead, all 50,000 clients saw the same white screen with black text I'd placed there hours earlier. License to use this domain expired upon termination of my employment. Please contact my attorney to negotiate new terms. No colors, no logos, no sugarcoating, just the truth and a direct line to the one person who could unlock their digital front door. I sat in my kitchen coffee mug, warm in my hand, watching it play out from a distance. Outside the street was quiet. Inside my phone buzzed with a steady pulse, news alerts, screenshots from friends, whispers from old teammates who still had eyes inside the building. Support wait times had jumped to 45 minutes. Clients were tagging the company on Twitter and LinkedIn, some politely, most not. The beauty of it was in the escalation. At first they'd blame it on a server outage, then IT would confirm the servers were fine. That's when the panic would begin to harden because the problem wasn't inside their walls. It was the walls themselves. By 8:20, team leads were probably huddled around screens whispering like the air itself was dangerous. Some junior tech would run a voice lookup, and there it would be my name clear as daylight under registrant owner. That moment, that's when the room goes silent. I imagined the COO's face, the smirk long gone, replaced by the pale realization that the mug on his desk wasn't worth a damn thing. He'd have to explain this to the CEO. The CEO would have to explain it to the board. And none of them could change the fact that the keys they needed weren't theirs. Before I keep going, tell me, have you ever watched someone realize they've built their empire on sand? Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't yet, stick around. You're about to see exactly how fast it can sink. By 8:30, the story was already leaking outside the building. A tech blog posted a vague headline about major client portal disruption at a regional SaaS provider. 10 minutes later, someone uploaded a screenshot of my message to Reddit. Within half an hour, the hashtags started trending. I didn't need to refresh the news to know what was happening inside those glass walls. Panic has a smell to it, acrid, sharp, the scent of burnt patience. Executives would be calling emergency meetings. PR would be drafting. We are aware of the issue statements that said nothing. Legal would be digging through contracts looking for a clause they could twist into leverage. But they wouldn't find one. At 8:45, my phone rang an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, this time with the CEO's direct line on the screen. I let it ring twice before I picked up, keeping my tone as neutral as if I were answering a telemarketer. "Daniel," he said, voice syrupy but tight at the edges, "we just want to clear up any misunderstandings and get things back on track today." I sipped my coffee before answering. "Call my lawyer." Oh, I don't think that's necessary. It is, I cut in. Have a good day. And I hung up. The call ended, but the real conversation had just begun, only now it was on my terms. They'd taken what they thought mattered. This morning, they were learning the truth. The real power had never left my hands. By 9:00 a.m., the outage wasn't just a hiccup, it was a full-scale collapse. The early morning confusion had curdled into frustration, and frustration had boiled over into fury. Clients weren't just calling support anymore. They were calling their account managers, their regional reps, even the CEO's assistant. The hashtags had sharpened into direct accusations. Our company, name just cost us a day's revenue. Who's paying for that? Others tagged industry reporters and news outlets. Once that happens, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Every tweet was a breadcrumb, leading curious eyes straight to the Voice record with my name on it. By 9:15, the company's PR department had gone into overdrive trying to corral the narrative. I knew exactly what was happening in that conference room because I'd been the one to prep those rooms for crises in the past. The CEO would be at the head of the table talking over people demanding solutions. The COO would be leaning forward, hands clasped, pitching half-baked tech fixes that didn't address the root problem. And legal would be scouring for any leverage to threaten me into compliance, which I also knew didn't exist. That domain wasn't theirs to threaten me over. It had never been theirs. From my kitchen table, I watched it all unfold like a slow-motion implosion. News sites began to sharpen their language. Company loses access to client portal over dispute with former employee. The phrasing was polite for now, but I knew how this would evolve. Once the outlets realized I had the paper trail to back it up, the dispute would turn into blunder. I'm curious, if you were in my shoes right now, would you take their first apology? Or let them sweat? Tell me in the comments. I'm betting I already know your answer. By 9:30, my phone buzzed again, this time with a legal notice in my inbox. The subject line read, "Cease and desist unauthorized control of company property." The body was an avalanche of corporate bluster words like malicious damages in excess of and interference with operations. It read less like a legal letter and more like a tantrum dressed up in Times New Roman. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I simply forwarded it to my lawyer with 2 words, "Your move." By 10:15, his reply was in their inbox. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't emotional, it was a scalpel. Page 1, the original domain registration invoice from 19 years ago, billed to my personal address, paid with my personal card. Page 2, the current registration details, listing me as the sole owner and administrative contact. Page 3, a tidy stack of renewal receipts, one for every year in between. That was it. No threats, no insults, just the facts. And facts, unlike executives, don't bluff. Somewhere in that building, someone opened that PDF and realized the truth. There was no backdoor, no loophole, no emergency override. Without my say-so, that portal was going to stay locked. The power dynamic shifted in that instant. This wasn't an IT issue anymore. It wasn't even an HR fallout. It was a property dispute, and the property was mine. By 11:00, the media had pounced. One of the biggest tech blogs ran a piece with the headline, "Critical SaaS Portal Taken Offline in Ownership Dispute." The lead image, a full, unedited screenshot of my message to their clients. No blurring, no speculation, just the truth in black and white. The comment section exploded. Some readers called it brilliant, others called it corporate negligence, but every single comment had one thing in common: they were talking about me, not them. And as the outrage built, I realized something: I didn't need to chase this win. I'd already won. Now it was just a matter of how far they'd fall before they admitted it. By noon, they'd stopped pretending this was just a technical glitch. The gloves were off. My phone lit up with another call from the CEO. This time, I didn't let it ring out. I answered on the 3rd buzz, my voice calm, almost detached. "Daniel," he began, syrup thick in his tone, "we'd like to resolve this situation quickly. No need to make it bigger than it is." I could almost hear the PR team huddled in the background feeding him lines. "We're prepared to offer you a generous settlement," he continued, "if you'll just get the portal running today." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Call my lawyer." He chuckled awkwardly like we were sharing a private joke. "No, really, I'm sure we can work something out between us." "It's not between us," I cut in. "It's between your company and the facts." There was a pause, a beat too long. Then the sound of shuffling papers, whispered voices. "Daniel, we don't want this to get messy." "It's already messy," I said. "You made it messy the moment you thought I was replaceable." I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down, didn't raise my voice. That's not how you hold leverage. You don't let them think they've rattled you. You let them sit in the discomfort of your stillness. If you've ever had someone try to downplay the damage they caused you just to save themselves, drop it in the comments. I want to know how you handled it, because in my case, the quieter I got, the louder the truth became. At 12:45, another email from their lawyers landed in my inbox. This one was even longer, a wall of text dripping with legalese meant to intimidate. Words like injunctive relief and irreparable harm popped out in bold. I didn't even read it in full before forwarding it to my attorney. His response: a single sentence. We've already given them the facts. Let them talk to themselves. That was the beauty of this position. I didn't have to win the argument. The paper trail already had. By 1:30 p.m., the story had broken wide open. It wasn't just tech blogs anymore. Mainstream business outlets were running with it. CNBC, Bloomberg, even a local news station that loved a David versus Goliath story had picked it up. The phrasing varied, but the narrative was the same: longtime employee fired. Company loses access to critical portal. Ownership belongs to ex-employee. I imagined the COO pacing in his office, face red, barking orders to just switch it to a new domain. It would have to explain for the third or fourth time that it wasn't that simple, that every client login, every automated system, every bookmarked URL depended on the domain I controlled, and that even if they could rebuild the infrastructure overnight, convincing 50,000 clients to trust the new system was a whole different war. Meanwhile, I was making another pot of coffee. The hum of the machine filled the quiet in my kitchen, a sharp contrast to the chaos I knew was crackling through their building. This was the part I'd envisioned from the start. Not the headlines or the hashtags, but the moment they realized there was no quick fix. The moment the board stopped asking, "How do we solve this?" and started asking, "How did we let this happen?" Because that's when people in power turn on each other. And I was more than happy to let them. By mid-afternoon, the calls slowed. Not because they'd given up, but because they were regrouping. The next move wouldn't come from the CEO or the COO. It would come from higher up. And when it did, I knew exactly what I'd tell them. This was never about money. This was about making things right on my terms. At 4:12 p.m., my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Not blocked, not labeled, just clean and unfamiliar. That alone told me it wasn't the CEO or the COO. They'd burned their chances already. I answered, and the voice on the other end was different, steady, precise. Daniel, the caller, said, not as a question, not as an introduction. Just my name spoken with a weight that caught my attention. This is Margaret Wells. I'm calling on behalf of the board. No fake pleasantries, no syrup, just the straight line. She didn't waste time. We'd like to discuss terms. It was the first honest thing anyone from that building had said to me in the last 36 hours. Not threats, not condescension, terms. I let a pause stretch, the kind that makes the other person lean toward the phone. I'm listening, I said. We'd like to restore service as soon as possible, she continued, each word carefully chosen. If you'll outline what you need in order to make that happen, we're prepared to move quickly. I could hear it in her tone, the awareness that she was dealing with someone who didn't bluff, someone who wasn't negotiating for sport. This wasn't the bluster of a COO who thought leadership was about posturing. This was someone who knew the stakes and wanted the bleeding to stop. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This isn't about a payout, I said slowly. It's about making things right. There was a rustle of movement on her end, the sound of people leaning in around a speakerphone. First, I said, you're going to reinstate 3 employees you terminated without cause in the past year. Full back pay, no probation periods. They were good at their jobs and you threw them aside because they didn't fit someone's ego. She didn't interrupt. That told me she was taking notes or already considering how to make it happen. Second, I continued, you will issue a public statement. Not a vague, we value our team corporate gloss. A statement naming those 3 employees, detailing their contributions to the company, and acknowledging the damage done by removing them. The silence on the other end was thick enough to feel. I could almost hear the boardroom calculations, the PR fallout, the legal exposure, the bruised egos. And third, I said, letting each word land, the COO resigns. Publicly, effective immediately. No golden parachute. No consulting contract disguised as a favor. He leaves with nothing but his smirk. That silence deepened. This wasn't shock, it was calculation. Pride versus survival. And survival almost always wins. I understand those are strong demands, Margaret said finally, her voice a shade tighter now. They're fair, I replied, and they're final. If you agree, I'll approve the domain renewal and have the portal live within the hour. If not, I let the sentence hang in the air. If not, they already knew the alternative. Another day of headlines, another day of client rage, another day of investors wondering how leadership could lose the keys to their own front door. Before we move on, what would you have added to those demands? If it were you, I'm curious. Drop your thoughts below because I had a feeling mine were just the start of what they deserved. When we hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, centered, because no matter how they chose to respond, one truth remained. They'd already been forced to acknowledge the one thing they'd spent years pretending wasn't true without me. The company didn't just lose a person. They lost the blueprint. The night after that call was one of the quietest I'd had in years. No ringing phone, no email pings, no late-night urgent messages demanding I jump online and fix someone else's mess. They were thinking, and thinking in their world was dangerous because it meant admitting they'd run out of quick fixes. The longer they stayed silent, the more obvious it became that they were weighing the cost of my demands against the cost of another day of humiliation. The media coverage hadn't cooled off. If anything, it was boiling harder. By morning, the top industry newsletter had sent a push notification to every subscriber: fired employee holds keys to SaaS giant's client portal negotiations underway. The words negotiations underway told me someone in their camp had leaked it to save face to make it sound like they were in control. But the comments told another story. People weren't buying it. Too many details were already out there. The voice record, the screenshots of my message, the timeline of events. It didn't matter what spin they tried. Around 8:00 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Same number, same calm voice. Daniel Margaret began the board met late last night. We've reviewed your conditions. I waited. We're prepared to meet the first two immediately. The reinstatements will be processed today with full back pay. The statement is being drafted for release this morning. Her tone shifted slightly, a hint of tension beneath the professionalism. The third condition will require a vote. I let the silence stretch. That's not my problem, I said. I understand, she replied quickly. The vote is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. I'll call you with the outcome. It wasn't bluster. She was telling me the truth. The question was, did the rest of that board understand the clock they were on? Right now, I want you to think, if you were on that board, would you cut loose one man to save the company or protect him and burn the whole thing down? Let me know, because their answer was going to decide the ending of this story. At 9:26 a.m., my phone rang again. No preamble this time. The vote passed, Margaret said. Effective immediately, the COO has resigned. I pictured him pacing in his office for the last time, shredding papers that didn't matter, clearing out drawers no one cared about. That smirk he'd worn the day he thought he'd won gone. Probably replaced by the tight-lipped expression of someone realizing they'd handed their own executioner the blade. Margaret's voice pulled me back. We'll release the statement at 9:45 across all channels. Once it's live, we'll be expecting your confirmation on the renewal. That's fair, I said. When we hung up, I didn't move to my laptop right away. I just sat there staring at my coffee cup, letting the moment breathe. Because this wasn't about flipping a switch, it was about ending the game the right way. They'd played their part. Now it was my turn. And when the statement dropped, the whole world would see just how much a single replaceable person could change the balance of power. At exactly 9:45 a.m., my notifications lit up like a Christmas tree. Emails, pings, even a few text messages from friends in the industry. Did you see it yet? The company's statement had gone live. Everywhere. Website, Twitter, LinkedIn, press wires. And it wasn't the vague corporate doublespeak I'd expected. It was exactly what I'd demanded. 3 names spelled correctly, reinstated effective immediately with full back pay. A paragraph outlining each person's contributions over the years, details only someone who'd worked alongside them could have provided. It was the kind of public acknowledgement that no PR team would have volunteered to write unless they were cornered. Then came the real prize, the final paragraph. Effective immediately, the Chief Operations Officer has resigned from the company. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors. I laughed under my breath. That was as polite as it was going to get, but anyone who knew the industry would read between the lines. This wasn't a graceful exit. This was a forced march out the door. And the timing, 48 hours after my termination, made it obvious why. Industry blogs wasted no time. Within minutes, the resignation letter itself leaked, scanned, and posted in full. It was 3 clipped paragraphs of corporate frostbite ending with a jagged signature that looked more like a scratch than a name. One tech commentator tweeted a screenshot of it with the caption, "And that's how you do it." I took my time before logging into the registrar. This wasn't a race anymore. It was the last act of a carefully staged play. At 9:58, I entered my credentials. At 9:59, the renewal request was confirmed. By 10:01, the portal was live again. Inside their building, I could imagine the sighs of relief, short, sharp, the kind you let out when you've just avoided catastrophe, but still feel the echo of it in your bones. Phones would stop ringing off the hook. Support queues would shrink. And somewhere in a boardroom, Margaret Wells would be telling the rest of them, "We did what we had to do." Before I move on, I've got to ask, if you were in my position, would you have restored it right away? Or made them wait a little longer? I'm curious where you stand on that line between justice and satisfaction. Drop it in the comments. By 10:15, the narrative online had shifted. The outage was over, but the headlines were just getting sharper. COO resigns, amid portal dispute board, reverses firings to restore service. Some outlets were already calling it one of the most public corporate self-owns in recent memory. I didn't post anything, didn't give interviews, I didn't need to. The facts were out there, and the story didn't need my commentary to spread. Quiet wins have their own volume. From my kitchen window, I could see the frost starting to melt off the grass, the first sign the day was warming up. Inside, my coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Because somewhere in a gleaming glass tower full of people who thought they understood power, they were learning the truth. Power isn't about holding the mug. Power is about holding the keys. The rest of that day felt almost surreal. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing for the next gut punch. The phone calls stopped. The emails turned into neutral updates, server statuses, confirmation receipts, meeting invites that I could choose to ignore. But there was something else in the air too, a kind of unease. You can win a fight like this and still feel the hum of unfinished business under your skin. By mid-afternoon, I started getting messages from people inside the company, some from my old team, some from departments I'd barely interacted with. They weren't just thanks or glad you're back, they were confessions. One engineer wrote, "I stayed quiet when they came for you. I'm sorry. I thought if I kept my head down I'd be safe. I was wrong." Another said, "You don't know me, but what you did. It gave me the guts to quit today. I'm starting something new." These weren't just personal notes, they were proof that the ripple effect was real. I'd pushed back hard, but it wasn't just about my reinstatement or even my friends. It was about showing everyone that the company's grip wasn't as ironclad as it wanted to appear. Around 4 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Margaret Wells. Her voice was warmer this time, almost human. "Daniel, the board wanted me to personally thank you for resolving this matter in a way that, well, let's just say it avoided a far greater disaster." I didn't respond right away. The silence seemed to make her nervous. And she added quickly, "I wanted you to know something off the record. The COO wasn't the only one the board has in its sights. This has been a wake-up call." That got my attention, meaning I asked. "Meaning," she said carefully, "you may have set a precedent. The old guard isn't untouchable anymore." We didn't speak much after that, but her words stayed with me. You see, this is where stories like this get tricky, when the people who were part of the machine start seeing cracks in it. If you've ever been in a fight like this, you know exactly what I mean. And if you haven't, maybe think about who you'd be if your turn came. That evening, I went for a walk. The winter air was sharp enough to bite, but I welcomed it. Passing shop windows, I caught my reflection a few times, same face, same coat, same pace. But there was something in my eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. It wasn't pride, not exactly. More like a quiet confirmation that I could stand my ground and not crumble, that I could take a hit meant to flatten me and turn it into leverage. And as I passed under the streetlights, one thought anchored itself so firmly in my mind that I almost said it out loud. This wasn't the end. This was just proof that the next time they tried something like this, someone, maybe me, maybe not, would be ready, and holding the keys. The following morning I woke before sunrise. Not because I had to, but because my mind wouldn't stop turning over the last 48 hours like a Rubik's Cube. Outside, the streets were still quiet, blanketed in that pale orange haze that only happens just before the sun tips over the horizon. I brewed coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I wasn't checking emails this time, those could wait. Instead, I opened a fresh document. It was time to write everything down. Not for the public, not yet, but for me. I wanted the details preserved while they were still sharp, the smirk on the COO's face in that first meeting, The exact phrasing of Margaret's amicable solution called the timestamp on the first headline that went live about the outage. And more importantly, I wanted to record the turning points, those moments when I could have folded but didn't. By 7:30 a.m., the document had grown to 10 pages. I paused, sipped my coffee, and stared at the blinking cursor. The question now was what to do with this story. I could publish it anonymously. I could send it to one of the tech blogs that had been circling me for quotes. Or I could hold on to it a loaded chamber for the day they or anyone like them came for me again. I didn't decide right then. Instead, I closed the file, encrypted it, and moved it to a drive they'd never have access to. Just as I did, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from someone I never expected. Harper, an ex-colleague who'd left the company 2 years earlier after a similarly ugly falling out. She'd seen the headlines and wanted to meet. We met at a diner halfway between our neighborhoods. She slid into the booth across from me, eyes bright a smile, just shy of conspiratorial. "I've been waiting for someone to do what you just did," she said before the coffee even arrived. "And now that you have, I think it's time we talk about the bigger picture." Turns out Harper had been quietly collecting stories, whistleblowers, forced resignations, NDA threats, all connected to the same network of executives and board members. My fight had cracked the surface, but underneath there was a pattern. "You didn't just win your job back," she said. "You hit them in their public image, and that's where they're most fragile. If we pull the right threads, the whole thing could unravel." Her words lit something in me. I'd thought my role in this was over, but maybe I'd only just stepped onto a much larger stage. And here's where I'll leave you wondering, if you had the power to expose everything, knowing it might cost you again, would you take the shot? Or would you walk away while you're ahead? I didn't answer Harper right away. The server brought our plates, and we ate in near silence, both turning over the possibilities in our heads. By the time I left the diner, the sun was high, the streets were buzzing, and my phone was once again full of notifications. But this time it wasn't panic buzzing under my skin, it was something sharper. Anticipation. Because now I knew. I wasn't just holding the keys. I might be holding the map. That night, I couldn't sleep. Harper's words kept echoing in my head, looping like a song I couldn't shut off. If we pull the right threads, the whole thing could unravel. I lay there in the dark, thinking about every name she'd mentioned, every incident she'd hinted at, and every file I still had, saved from my years inside the company. The thing about working somewhere long enough is you start seeing the fault lines. And if you're smart, you keep records, not because you expect a fight, but because you know one day you might have no choice but to defend yourself. By 3 a.m., I gave up on sleeping. I grabbed my laptop, sat at the kitchen table, and started compiling. Emails, meeting notes, old performance reviews that contradicted the justification for other people's firings. Internal memos marked confidential that painted a picture far different from the one the board sold to shareholders. It was like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle, except I already knew what the picture would be. A machine fueled by fear and sealed with silence. Around dawn, I sent Harper a message I'm in. Her reply came almost instantly. "Good. We need to move fast. They're already trying to rewrite the narrative." She wasn't kidding. By the time I checked the news feeds, a new set of articles had gone up, anonymous insider quotes about rogue employees and internal sabotage. The company was trying to turn the tables, make it look like we were the problem all along. The smear campaign didn't scare me this time. If anything, it confirmed we were onto something. The louder they shouted, the closer we were to hitting a nerve. Harper and I met again that afternoon, this time with 2 other former employees she trusted. Over coffee in the back corner of a bookstore cafe, we laid everything out, what we had, what we still needed, and how to connect the dots. It felt almost cinematic. Hushed voices, glances over our shoulders, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. But there was nothing romantic about it. This was strategy. We decided to work in layers. First, build an airtight case with undeniable proof. Second, find the right outlet to release it. Third, brace for the blowback. Because there would be blowback. That was inevitable. Before we parted ways, Harper looked me dead in the eye. "Once this starts, there's no going back. They'll come for your reputation, maybe even your career. You ready for that?" I didn't hesitate. I already lost both once. If I can take them down, it's worth it. And if you've been listening this far, you can probably tell this is where the real story starts. Everything up to now. That was just the opening act. Walking home through the rain, I felt a strange mix of calm and adrenaline. Calm because I knew exactly what I needed to do. Adrenaline because every step forward meant stepping deeper into territory I couldn't retreat from. When I got back, I opened the document I'd started that morning and gave it a new title. Not something dramatic. Just one word that summed it all up: blueprint. 'Cause this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was demolition. The first domino fell on a Thursday. Harper had managed to secure a meeting with an investigative journalist. She trusted a woman named Claire, known for taking on corporate giants and refusing to be intimidated. We met in a quiet booth at a downtown bar that still smelled faintly of old wood and cigarette smoke, the kind of place you could talk for hours without anyone noticing. Claire didn't waste time. She set her recorder on the table and said, "Tell me everything. But know this, if I run this, it's going to be a firestorm. Are you ready for the kind of attention that comes with it?" I looked at Harper, then back at Claire. "We're ready. We have the receipts." And we did. For the next 2 hours, we walked her through it all: timeline, names, dates, internal documents, even audio from a meeting where one exec laughed about burying a whistleblower in legal fees until they broke. Claire's eyes stayed locked on us, her expression unreadable, but I could see the flicker of something: determination, maybe even anger. When we finished, she said, "I'll verify every piece. If it checks out, we'll run it. And when we do, you'd better believe they'll come for you harder than they ever have." We knew. We didn't care. The next week was a blur of calls, encrypted messages, and late-night edits to the draft Claire was preparing. Every so often, she'd text us a simple update: "Almost there. Hang tight." And then one Friday morning, my phone lit up with a single message from her: "It's live." I clicked the link. There it was, front page of one of the biggest investigative outlets in the country. The headline was brutal, the subhead even more so. Every detail we'd given her was there, backed up by proof she'd independently confirmed. They couldn't spin their way out of this. Not this time. By noon, it was everywhere. Twitter threads, LinkedIn posts, podcasts dissecting every revelation. Stock prices dipped. Board members issued canned statements that only made them look guiltier. Current employees started leaking more, feeding the fire. The smear campaign against me flared up, but it fizzled faster this time. Too many people had seen the truth laid out in black and white. Too many were now asking questions the company couldn't answer. Harper called me that night, her voice shaking, not from fear but from something close to disbelief. "We actually did it," she said. "Not yet," I replied, "but we've started something they can't stop. And here's where I turn to you, because if you followed me this far, you've been part of this journey in your own way." Stories like this don't end with one article. They end when enough people decide they've had enough, when silence stops being the safe option. So if you're still here, still listening, share this. Talk about it. Make it impossible to ignore. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of bourbon, watching the city lights flicker like a living thing. The air felt lighter somehow, as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had shifted just enough to let me breathe. It wasn't over. The lawsuits would come, the public battles, the attempts to rebuild their image. But now we weren't fighting in the dark anymore. We had the truth, and the truth had teeth. And as I leaned back in my chair, I realized something. This had stopped being about my job a long time ago. Now it was about making sure no one else would have to fight this fight alone again. When the dust finally settled, the world had moved on, but for me, the echoes remained. The CEO and CTO had resigned in disgrace, their names now footnotes in articles about corporate greed and cautionary tales in business schools. The company scrambled to rebuild its image, but no amount of PR could erase the screenshots, the recordings, or the undeniable truth that had been laid bare. For weeks, I kept my head down. I wasn't looking for applause or headlines. I was looking for peace. And slowly it came. Morning coffee without the anxiety of checking my inbox. Evenings spent with friends without the shadow of unfinished battles hanging over me. The constant hum of fear I'd carried for years finally faded into silence. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about reclaiming something I hadn't realized. I'd lost my sense of self. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about the people who were still there, the ones too afraid to speak. I hoped that what I'd done gave them a little courage, a little proof that standing up was possible even when the odds felt impossible. Looking back, I realized this had never truly been about revenge. It was about balance, about putting a crack in the armor of people who thought they were untouchable, just to remind them, and everyone else, that no one is beyond accountability. And as I closed my laptop for the last time on the blueprint file, I smiled. Not because I'd destroyed them, but because I'd freed myself. If you've made it here, maybe there's a fight you've been avoiding. Maybe it's time to remember you have more power than you think.